In this episode, I'm gonna tell you about breaking FUD, which is the latest and the greatest and the most polished and the most topical of all Bitcoin takeover magazines that I created so far. I'm really proud of this, and if you have been following me on Twitter, I guess you already know about this. You know that this exists, you know that this is an open source project, you know that it has some of the greatest graphics that you can find in any magazine, you know that I brag about this a lot. And you might even conclude that I'm only promoting this because I have this dream to get a Toyota Supra that I can drive around and get a girlfriend. I mean, I do have a Toyota Supra and it's a Lego, but I do have also another plan to get a real one so that I can put the toy Toyota Supra inside of the real Toyota Supra. But let's not digress too much. The point of this video is to talk about breaking FUD and also walk you through the history, which is not very long, but there's still a history of the Bitcoin takeover magazines. So first of all, what is this? Well, I decided to write a magazine about the 10 most common misconceptions about Bitcoin, and I took each one of them according to what ChatGPT recommended. So basically, I have this page in the magazine, and I'm gonna show it to you right now. Hey ChatGPT, what are the 10 most common misconceptions about Bitcoin? And I got these responses: regulation, competition from other cryptocurrencies, scalability issues, security vulnerabilities, volatility, limited use cases, energy consumption, centralization of mining, lack of education and understanding, and lack of mainstream acceptance. I think most of this is silly, but there's something legit to it. And I think in the future, a lot of people will ask ChatGPT because it's gonna turn into the next Google, the next Oracle that people use to get some sort of truth out of it. They're going to ask ChatGPT the same question and they're gonna get the same response. And I want this to be out there. I want this to be available. But it's not just about ChatGPT. I think this is just the trendiest, coolest tool that we have around. And for the record, I did not use ChatGPT to write this, but I did use Midjourney to create some of the beautiful graphics that you can see here, because I figured out that Midjourney does something very right, and it's called style. You can tell it to create an image. For example, this is Cubism. In Cubism style, I created all of these beautiful paintings in the style of Picasso, and I think as an art geek, I was able to create a lot of very nice images like this solar punk background and also this film noir aesthetic that I did in the article about use cases. And also, for example, I did some 8-bit graphics in the article about security vulnerabilities. So there's a lot to unpack here. I think every article is unique, not just because it's a different topic, but also because it has different graphics. But I digress once again because there's so much more to this and it has a greater purpose, and you're gonna find the download link below if you want to download this, if you want to print it yourself, if you want to use it for whatever purpose of education. But there's also an opportunity for you to buy it from lots of places, because since it's open source, it means that anyone can print it, can modify it, can copy it, can change it. I said modify and change, they're the same thing. Can sell it, and that's a big and very important use case because people can sell this in their shops. And I already spoke with Shop&Bit, Parallelly Police, who created the first edition of the magazine. I think they still have like 5 copies of this. They created about 50 and they still have 5. They have their own special Pizza Day cover. And also Ellen Bits, I spoke with them and they want to create their own edition, and it's gonna have a purple cover because of course. So there's Shop&Bit, Ellen Bits, and there's also Paralleling Police who are selling this. I'm also trying to get it to Crypto Cloaks, and I'm also gonna have one at every conference where I'm going. Because it's important for me to promote this project, not just because it's made by me, but because it addresses problems in a different way. When most people are critical about Bitcoin, you point them to a book, to a podcast, to something which takes a lot of time. But most of the times there is not something specific. It's not something to cover their concerns. This is why I created Breaking FUD. It has 10 of the most common pieces of FUD as suggested by ChatGPT. And I've also added the 11th article, which is called Real FUD. Actually, it's called FUD for Thought. So as you can see, I don't even know the titles of my own articles. But this one is special because it explains, okay, ChatGPT presented some FUD, but there's a little more. There's something to be said about fungibility. There's also something to be said about the security budget issue. You know, as the block reward diminishes, the price has to double after every halving cycle. And if it doesn't, we have to increase the fees. And if we don't like more fees or more expensive fees, then we have to do something about scalability to fit more transactions in this. And the most radical solution, if nothing else works, is to add inflation. And I think Peter Todd plays the devil's advocate with that one. So I did explain that Bitcoin has these use cases and has these purposes, and it's supposed to be censorship resistant and unconfiscatable money that you can send to anyone around the world without permission. There's a huge use case for this, especially in the era of, I guess, not just surveillance capitalism, because third parties, businesses are going to censor you according to where you get your money from, but also central bank digital currencies, which seem to be always around the corner, threatening that they're gonna take away a lot of your privacy. I think Bitcoin is gonna be exactly the tool that we need to be able to deal with this situation. And the more people understand what this is about, and the more people understand that this is so much more than just speculation and getting rich and getting Lambos. And by the way, the Toyota Supra is the pleb's Lambo. It's 10 times the... Actually, no, not 10 times the price. It's 10 times least expensive as opposed to a Lambo, and it offers 90% of the sports car experience, and it's more reliable. So I'm shilling the Toyota Supra lately for reasons which I'm still trying to figure out, because Toyota does not sponsor me, does not give me any money. I don't think they're gonna give me a discount when I get a Supra just to make this meme go full circle. But there's so much more to Bitcoin than Supras and Lambos and whatever. It's about freedom, it's about being able to transact, it's about being able to take your wealth across borders, it's about being able to enable your family to inherit your wealth without paying stupid taxes. It's super great, and it has a lot of good use cases for humanity, and we're just scratching the surface. I think in the coming years, in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to be a much bigger phenomenon. And the way that we should approach this is to basically tell people why they have been misled about Bitcoin. This is what Bitcoin FUD is about. It starts from the assumption that most people already know about Bitcoin. They have heard about it, they have had at least a conversation or saw at least one news report about it, and they have an impression about what it is. It has been around for 14 years now, which is a long time. And most people around the world, billions of people, know about Bitcoin. They know it exists, but they think it's some sort of Ponzi scheme. They think it's something that their government is going to ban or censor. They think it's only for speculation. They think it's not for them. And I used to have the same exact situation, the same exact FUD in my head. And I described this in the first article, which is the foreword. It's called Embracing Bitcoin. And in this one, I basically explained that I discovered Bitcoin in 2013 on the internet through my own research, and I thought it was a stupid idea, and it took me 4 hard years of stumbling upon Bitcoin once again coming to the conclusion that it's not the right time to buy, maybe that it's a failed project, as Mike Hearn said in 2016. And it was this journey, which of course it was not always about Bitcoin. I did a lot of stuff with my life. I went to university, I graduated, I got a master's degree, I got scholarships. But all this time, Bitcoin was in the background. I was hearing more and more about it. I was reading about it, but I just came to the conclusion that it's not for me. And every time I was making excuses. But if somebody explained to me why this exists and what it does, that it's unconfiscatable, uncensorable, and permissionless, and it's basically the BitTorrent of money, something that enables you to send worldwide without anybody's permission, I guess I would have embraced it much sooner. And this has nothing to do with the idea of getting rich. It's just that you need this type of money. But you don't think that you need it until you actually need it. Because, for example, in my family, I'm Romanian. I have my grandparents who saw the transition from the Kingdom of Romania to the Popular Republic of Romania, so basically the coming of communism. And then they had to deal with confiscation of wealth, and they saw their parents, so my grandparents, they lost everything to the communists. They had, maybe if they had a small business, as was the case in my family, they lost it. They lost their homes. They were in the middle of losing their privileges. My grandfather could not finish high school until there was a change in the regime that enabled him to go to school, as he was not considered to have healthy roots. He was not coming from a peasant or a very working class family. So that meant basically that you're an enemy of the state, even if you did nothing because you're a kid. So there was this confiscation problem with my grandparents, and then my parents' generation was the one that came with the revolution in 1989. If you know a bit of history, you know that there was this Iron Curtain, which basically meant that Europe was divided in the West and the East. Central and Eastern Europe was communist with very few exceptions, one of them being Greece. And yeah, it was rough. Communism meant confiscation of wealth, it meant total control. It was a totalitarian regime where everything was controlled by the state, and you had to account for everything. Everyone was working for the state. There was nothing private about what you were doing. There was this secret police that was collecting information about what you were doing. And if you were maybe not the best of citizens, you could not just go to jail, but go to some sort of forced labor camp, some coal mine, so that you would produce something. So it was pretty rough, and people would disappear all the time. My grandparents and my parents, I guess, they did pretty well. Not necessarily blending into the system, but they had no choice but to live with that and accept the realities of daily life. And my parents did see the revolution, then they saw hyperinflation. Because during regime changes, there's this instability which concerns fiat currencies, and Romania was not ready for what was about to come. And basically, the story is that my parents had their wedding in November of 1989. They raised money, enough money to buy a new car. In communism, which lasted for another month, if you wanted to buy a new car, you had to deposit the entire amount of money and wait for the state to deliver your car in 2 or 3 years or something. And they never got the car, even though they deposited the money. The regime changed, the production cycles at the automobile factory changed, and they basically asked for their money back. And of course they got their money back, but after 3 years or something, and by the time they got their money back due to inflation, their money was only enough to buy a couch. And I don't have a better way to describe this. The money that once was enough to buy a new car, eventually in 3 years ended up only buying a new couch. And that kind of hurts when you think about it. I mean, of course, my parents had to live with this situation. They had to raise me and my brother. It was pretty rough in the 90s. And then I guess it got a little better. But if I knew about all this and I knew about what Bitcoin does, and it wasn't presented to me just in the way that it's presented in mainstream media, that it's something that criminals use to launder money and to buy drugs and whatever, to speculate for gambling or whatever, then I guess I would have embraced Bitcoin much sooner. Because in lots of places around the world, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of us Eastern Europeans have stories about confiscation and inflation. It's much worse in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. The more regime changes you have and the more political instability, the more volatility you're going to have in the national currency. And this means that a lot of savings and livelihoods are going to be destroyed for reasons which do not even concern the ones who are saving. They're the ones who are innocent. They are the ones that played by the rules, they did everything right, but they kept their savings in a currency that's going to end up getting devalued. Right now, I think countries like Turkey and Argentina, even though you might not think that they are part of the second or third world, they're dealing with double or even triple digit inflation. And this isn't the usual Venezuela example or maybe some communist country which we assume by default that it's poor and it's performing economically badly. No, these are countries that are actually wealthy. They have lots of resources, they have armies, they're pretty much prepared to deal with this global economic landscape, and yet their national currency is getting devalued very fast. And it makes no sense to save in the Argentinian pesos or the Turkish lira. And kind of Bitcoin fixes this. It's a meme, but if you talk with Turkish people or Argentinian people and you explain this to them, it's likely that they're going to put part of their savings into Bitcoin and they're going to protect themselves. Because at the end of the day, what is Bitcoin? You can theorize and you can come up with definitions about what money is, but at the end of the day, it's a blackmail mechanism. It's a way of negotiating with your government. You're telling them, I don't like what you're doing. I don't trust that your currency is going to hold its value. So I'm going to use this neutral, non-governmental money, which exists and is global and that you cannot control. And I'm going to save my money into this. And whenever I need to use it, I'm going to go to some ATM or exchange or whatever. And I can do that in another country. So unless you're going to serve my interests and you're going to be accountable and you're going to do a good job, not destroy the national economy, then I'm not going to spend my money here. I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to support your government. And this is, I think, the most peaceful and effective protest that you can do as a citizen. I think eventually some political systems will collapse. I'm not sure about the big powers that we have today, how these empires are going to collapse. It's pretty hard to imagine given the amount of technology and cultural control and military that they have. So I'm not sure if it's gonna happen in our lifetime that the US dollar is gonna go to zero, because the more they print, the more they create demand for it. They understand the supply-demand mechanism, and basically they're going to go to some other country and make them adopt the dollar. And there's gonna be a wave of dollarization around the world, but nations accepting the dollar as a more stable currency as opposed to their national currency. But there's also going to be Bitcoin as an alternative, as something that you can use whenever you don't like the national money, or you want to protect yourself from something that might be cooking, something that might be coming and is totally against your interests and against the preservation of your work. Because basically money is what we get for our work. And why would we want to keep our money into something that's going to get devalued and basically diminish the value of our work and reduce the quality of our lives? I wish I knew this back in 2013 when I first read about Bitcoin and I dismissed it as a bad idea. Now I wrote this. I think it's a shortcut for everyone who wants to learn more about Bitcoin and understand what it is and what it does. And it's not just some sort of patronizing book like the Bitcoin Standard, which uses historical arguments to explain to you, this is why this makes sense and nothing else is good money. No, this takes the reverse approach and basically deconstructs your deepest fears. Like, you think that Bitcoin is not going to scale? I have an article about this. You think that maybe, let's find another one. Maybe it's too volatile. I mean, that's one of the best arguments. I'm not even sure if it's necessarily FUD, but it needs a certain point of reference. You can say that it's volatile against something, but at the same time, it's positively, or how should I put it? It gains value against something else. Maybe that against the US dollar, it's about 55% down right now from the all-time high. But as opposed to the Turkish lira or other fiat currencies, it's actually going up. And you have to understand that there's so much to this world as opposed to the United States and their culture and their currency. The world is so much bigger. And of course, this goes to another point in which I want to announce that this magazine was officially translated in German by a guy whose name is Ray Risling, and I'm super grateful for this. And I expect more translations to come out. Personally, I work on a Romanian version of this, and I think I'm going to release it as a book as opposed to a magazine, and maybe try to have it published and distributed in lots of places. I mean, nothing against the magazine format, I personally prefer it, but sometimes the book looks more official. And I also made a bet with my own father because he doesn't believe that the magazine is too successful. So basically, he wants to try the book format and give it a try. And if I turn out to be right, I can tell him, I told you so. If he turns out to be right, I guess I have to. But I'm going to translate this, and I also want to thank Ray Risling, and I also want to thank all the other guys who are working currently on some other form of translations. I think that nowadays translation tools are super accessible. You can find AI software that translates stuff immediately, instantly, and then you can manually modify it to make sense, to have the phrasal verbs and all of the expressions make sense in your language. I'm not saying I'm gonna do that because I think for the Romanian edition of this, I'm gonna actually rewrite some parts so that they make more sense for someone who's reading about these concepts for the first time. But still, I think that this is maybe the most useful piece of work that I ever created, and I'm proud of it, and it makes me happy whenever I browse through it. And I'm gonna try to push it for the rest of the year. And it's open source. You can do whatever you want with this. You can sell it to make money. You can send it to a friend. You can bring it to some sort of meetup or discussion or class reunion or whatever. This is breaking FUD. And I think it's a pretty big deal because it takes people's fears about Bitcoin and it explains why they're not necessarily so. It doesn't necessarily say it's 100% wrong. It admits that there might be situations where these might be right, but at the same time, it provides some useful data and information that I think everyone should know about Bitcoin, at least at a very basic level. For example, there's this article about security vulnerabilities, and I'm super proud of it. It explains, wait, what does it mean to break Bitcoin? What does it mean to determine, brute force a private key? And what are the odds for you to do that? And the odds are super small. It takes millions of years with today's processing power, even with quantum computers, which get hyped a lot as something that's going to break the cryptography. Those are about 25, 30 years away from being capable enough to pose a threat to Bitcoin's cryptography. And by that time, I think that the cryptography is going to be much more advanced. So it's not such a big deal. It can be fixed with a soft fork to become quantum resistant and basically push this menace of quantum computers by another maybe 50, 100 years until they get enough qubits. And I think it's a cat and mouse kind of situation. And it's not as black and white as I guess quantum researchers present it when they say, oh, we're going to break Bitcoin with this because we're working and we have these many qubits and in 10 years it's going to go down and we're going to be able to claim Satoshi Nakamoto's coins. No, I think when they say this, they just try to get more funding for their projects. It makes very little sense what they're saying, and they're overhyping their own work probably to get some investors, to get some funding from some institution. And we have to be honest about what this is and how it works. And I did my best to be balanced and honest in my presentation. And once again, this is my best work. And my recommendation, for example, there's this article about mining centralization, which is a point that's usually being presented as a way to say that Bitcoin is not really decentralized because of these mining pools. I did explain how this works and why it's a bad take. And I did explain why Bitcoin doesn't burn the oceans. And it's actually a lot more energy efficient than some other sectors. It's just that it's the easiest to attack. It's not defended by lobbyists. And if you put it into perspective, Bitcoin as an energy consumer is not too far away from chemicals and paper and pulp and TVs in the US. I mean, Bitcoin consumes twice as much power, twice as much electricity as idle TVs in the US. And I'm pretty sure that idle TVs around the world consume much more electricity than Bitcoin itself. And then there is air conditioning, which consumes about 15 times more energy. I don't want to be wrong about the math, but it's more than 10 times, but it's less than 20 times. So I'm going to say 15 times more electricity. You can see here that this orange dot is Bitcoin and this large pink dot is AC. There's so much to be explained and to be presented, and I did my best to basically compress a lot of information in this compact format. I'm very proud of this. I personally think that if maybe a few million people read the information from this and had it condensed and presented in a way that makes sense for them, we could go to $100,000 per Bitcoin without institutions, without ETFs, and without the need to basically bend the knee to the big banks. And I'm not sure how many people agree with me on this one. And they're going to be like, yeah, but we need also institutions and nation state adoption for political reasons. I mean, I'm not going to argue against that. But what I'm saying is that Bitcoin was not made for them. They don't care about Bitcoin. These banks, BlackRock and the exchanges that try to push ETFs, they only report their profits in US dollars. I have the same opinion of MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor. They only care about maximizing their US dollars purchasing power. They don't care much about what Bitcoin is and what it does. And this financial invention was made for you and me, for regular people who need to escape in some way the system that oppresses them or the system that taxes them without consent by inflation, and the system that removes their freedoms. And basically with Bitcoin, you get a second chance. You can take your money and you can start a new and more fulfilled life somewhere else. And this is it. This is what Breaking FUD is all about. There's also an edition that's made by Parallel Police. This is actually the first edition. I think it's printed on thinner paper. It has more typos. I think I've made some improvements in the edition that came afterwards. But still, I'm honored that people around the world are printing different editions of this one. As I said, you should expect a version by Shop-in-Bit, which is going to have a golden cover, and another edition by LN-Bits, which is going to have a purple cover to match their branding. And I expect a lot more of these to pop up over the year or maybe next year. It doesn't matter when, because I'm pretty convinced that most of the information here is still going to be applicable 5 years, 10 years from now. Except that maybe I'm gonna start working on something else next year just because I have lots of interests and I'm not much of a shill. I don't spend too much time promoting my own work, and sometimes I feel bad about it because by the time I finish something, I already know what I want to do next and what I want to work on. This is detrimental to the success of my own projects. And it kind of sucks, but this is why I've decided to talk more about this and do a YouTube video and go to conferences and present my project and see if they accept my pitch, basically. Because I started with the BTC-TKVR or Bitcoin Takeover magazine 2 years ago at the Mallorca conference, and I'm very proud that I was able to pull this off. This first edition, which I hold as a very personal and valuable collectible, is more rough, I guess, in terms of graphics. It's not as refined as the latest one, which is Breaking FUD. It looks like a nerdy early 2000s computer magazine, which I don't think is a bad aesthetic to have. but it's still a good beginning, I think, for the project. And basically what I did for this one was to put together my best articles, and this is also open source if you want to read it. I put together my best articles and I decided to do a magazine, and I launched it in Mallorca in Spain at the conference that used to be called Mallorca Blockchain Days, and now it rebranded as Bitcoin and Liberty. So this was the first one. In the first year, I printed around 600 of these, and I think I exceeded the expectations that the sponsors of the magazine had. I used the sponsorship money to basically print magazines and give them away. I ran this promotion to enable more people to get a hold of this new product and understand the power of open source. And then last year, on my 30th birthday, I launched this one in Istanbul. And I'm also very proud of this. It's like a proper continuation. I actually have some papers that I stored here. It's a proper continuation stylistically of the previous magazine. It follows some of the same style, so I still put some of... So this is magazine test number 1 from January of 2022. I generally keep magazines that were not distributed so that I can give away or offer more of them to people, get them in the hands of actual readers. That was my plan. So this one was more ambitious, meaning that it had articles about how to build your own hardware wallet, how profitable mining can be, how to choose your VPN. I think this is very important for people who care about privacy, and the difference between Tor and VPN. And it has lots of useful lessons, like why you should run your node on a Raspberry Pi. This was also a big deal at the time, but in the meantime, I think that the Raspberry Pi fell out of grace for reasons which concern availability and price. But still, I had a very nice follow-up. And this features some of the best articles that I wrote before 2021. This features the best articles that I wrote at age 29, basically, because I released it when I turned 30. And this is the first work of my 30s. I launched it at the age of 31, and I think it's my best work so far, also for the reason that it's a concept. It follows the exact same idea from start to finish. And I'm also proud of one more detail, which I'm going to present to you right now. It's the first magazine that I publish, and some pages are still glued to each other because I haven't actually read this one. I read the digital edition, which you can download in the description. So it has the first article by someone who's not me, from a guest, and his name is Grafton, and he decided to explain how he broke the FUD of his best friend and how he got him to buy Bitcoin. And I think this is very wholesome to have a last article at the end of these explanations about what Bitcoin is and why it doesn't work in the way that mainstream media and your government has told you, to have an actual personal story from someone who cares deeply about this stuff. And once again, I'm proud of this. I think this is my dark side of the moon. This is the wall. This is my physical graffiti. And in between these magazines also had one, which is more like a shameless plug. It's called Bitcoin Takeover, the first 109 episodes of the podcast. And it presents every podcast episode that I've ever had. So for example, this is Colin Harper from Bitcoin Magazine, and this is Dirt Gigi, and I interviewed them back in 2019. I started the Bitcoin Takeover podcast back in January of 2019 as a side project for myself, and it turned out to become my main job, which I was not even expecting. And each page from this magazine, which is also open source and you can find in the description below or on the Bitcoin Takeover website or on GitHub if you go there directly. The concept of this is to have each episode described on one page and also have a QR code so you can go listen to it. I created this more as a presentation catalog for people who are interested in listening to the show. For example, I guess some of you know about the Seed Signer, some of you know about Ben Ark, who did Ellen Bits, and he also created a cool hardware wallet that's called Bowser. And I'm also proud of this. It was quite a lot of work to try to remember. Basically, I wrote this in 2020, in late 2020, early 2021, and I struggled to remember, for example, this was the first episode that I ever recorded. And I had to go back and try to remember some information about it and how it went and what we talked about, the main talking points. I interviewed Giacomo Zucco back in March or April of 2019. It was season 2, episode 8. And I had to also go back and try to figure out what we really talked about. But I'm proud that I have this archive of episodes, and I'm gonna do another one next year because I kept on recording episodes. This one goes up to season 9. And from right now I have season 10, season 11, 12, and 13, which are finished and have about 50 episodes in total. And I also have season 14, which is ongoing, and you can listen to it. I'm gonna have a lot of cool episodes. I'm gonna have a debate about RBF, which is replaced by Fee and not resting bitch face, which features the CEO of Bitrefill, Sergey Kotlyar, as well as former Bitcoin Core developer Peter Todd, who is the creator of RBF and the biggest proponent right now. So I have this debate. I also have not a debate, but an interview with Michael Booman, better known as Boomy, who is the creator of, what's it called?
A few minutes later.
Boomy is the creator of Albi, so I also have an interview with him. And I think it's a very cool Lightning wallet with lots of features and lots of integrations. You might not be surprised to hear that Michael, better known as Boomy, has worked on a wallet that very much resembles MetaMask for Bitcoin, and it's called Joule. And this was back in 2018, 2019. So he imported all of this knowledge and all of this know-how that he has acquired with Joule, and he created Albi, which turned out to be super successful, especially because of the Nostr integration and all of this cool stuff that you can do with it. So yeah, I have lots of cool episodes coming on the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. Also try to do a weekly video in which I talk about stuff and write articles that are not necessarily related to the podcasts so that I have more content. And if you like what I'm doing, I think the best way to support my work is to consume it, basically. Listen to my podcast, leave comments to this video, subscribe, also like this video. If you want to make donations, you can also do that, but I gotta warn you that I have a fund for the Toyota Supra, so basically if you're giving me any money, it's gonna go towards acquiring a Toyota Supra at one point. I actually have some ideas for content if I get the Toyota Supra to drive around and talk with people about Bitcoin. I mean, that's just, a very far away dream right now. It seems so distant. It seems like 3 or 4 years away, but you gotta envision your plans. You gotta think about what you wanna do next, and you gotta be creative to find ways to not repeat the stuff that you do too much, to find new and exciting ways to do some of the same stuff, but in different ways, if that makes sense. And if it involves driving around a Toyota Supra and doing interviews with maybe no coiners or maybe actual Bitcoiners, I mean, that can be a lot of fun to just change the setting to make it more personal and have some engine revving sounds in the background. That can be fun. Or maybe not. You can tell me if it's a bad idea. So if you liked this presentation, which also covered the short history of the Bitcoin Takeover magazine, download Breaking FUD. You can do whatever you want with it, and I'm very proud of this. Share it with a friend. If he is skeptical about Bitcoin for whatever reason, it's likely that that reason is going to get presented and debunked in this magazine. So yeah, for me, it's a super big deal, and also must thank the sponsors who made this possible, because I spent a lot of money on the graphics this time around. I made sure this is going to look a lot nicer, And I think next year's magazine is gonna look even nicer only because I've learned so much working on this, and by the time I finished it, I already knew how I can improve it, but I guess, you gotta launch stuff, you gotta release it, you gotta make sure that you get stuff done, otherwise you get stuck always coming up with some new idea to change something that you've already done. I'm gonna save some of these ideas for next year's magazine, which I don't want to spoil too much, but I'm thinking about something about maybe the first year of Bitcoin to write a history magazine and explain what happened with Bitcoin in the first year. But I might as well do a bullish magazine and present basically for the upcoming bull market to present bullish narratives about Bitcoin and be more positive and try to present stuff that is going to be more appealing to general audiences as opposed to a history magazine. You can also give me feedback on that one. So let me know what you want to see on this channel and what you want to see in the future magazines. I have too many ideas and not enough time to put them into practice, but I'm happy that I have the time to do these videos and interact with you a little bit and give you some information about my work. Thank you for supporting it. I'm super proud to have, I don't approach this as a business. I approach this as something that makes me want to wake up every day and work and do something and feel happy about what I do. So it's also a hobby. And the fact that I get to enjoy this hobby and someone else is interested to consume the content, and the amounts of people interested in consuming the content are making sponsors interested, to me that's incredible. And I'm grateful for this life that I have and for this activity that I'm doing. And I would be happier if we spent more time talking about how we can break the FUD to actually increase adoption among the people who need Bitcoin the most. So thank you for listening, and make sure you check this one out because you're going to love it. I guarantee you that, it's my best work. If I cannot convince you with this one and you don't like it, probably you should look somewhere else for content. But I'm very positive that you're going to love it because it's nice, and also got some praise from some people who know so much more about Bitcoin than I do. And they were excited to get this, and they told me, you should push it harder. You should talk to more people, get more money from sponsors and stuff like that. For now, I think I'm happy with what I have and what I can do. But it's up to you and everyone else who downloads this to push up the numbers and increase the demand for this, because more demand is going to mean more success. And if this is more successful, I'm not necessarily going to make more money off of it because it's open source. But maybe next year when I release a new magazine, it might get better funding. It might get more attention. It might not require me to do YouTube videos and post about it every week on Twitter, because people are going to be excited and post about it by themselves. So thank you for this, really. If you made it up to this point, thank you once again for supporting my work. You're a hero. I very much respect the fact that you're here and you have onboarded this mission, and you're listening to me talking for, how long has it been? 43 minutes or something. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one.